When two Israelis were eating at a restaurant in Mexico City, authorities were pretty confused when a woman walked up and executed both of them. She claimed to be romantically involved with one of the guys and that he had cheated on her, but that was a lie. She was actually a paid shooter for a local cartel, a pretty cheap one at that, since she confessed to only making about 5,000 pesos, which is less than $300 for a double homicide. And then police realized that one of these men had an extensive criminal record in both Israel and Mexico. And that's when the police looked at each other and said, oh, okay. These guys were part of an Israeli crime syndicate, who allegedly might have had a disagreement with the Jalisco New Generation cartel. And then, a few months ago, I read about a former LAPD cop being arrested for a home invasion where he and a group of men kidnapped and held somebody for ransom in Koreatown, LA. And I thought, typical LA, right? That's weird. I'm sure that'll never come up again. And then I started looking into the Israeli Mafia, only to find that this guy, who was a cop in LA for 13 years, is actually an Israeli mobster. 6 men in Hollywood Hills, including this guy, plot the kidnapping of a 17-year-old crypto bro. And when they got to his house, 2 men disguised as LAPD officers pretended to serve a search warrant before holding him for ransom until he gave up $350,000.
A violent home robbery in Koreatown this morning with the suspects dressed as police officers. It happened in this apartment complex.
But for some reason, they drove a Urus and a Range Rover to the robbery because I don't know actually. It's not like Koreatown is Bel Air. When the police checked the cameras on that block, I'm sure these guys were in the only Urus that passed by that week. And if you stay in LA, you see other strange connections. The illegal gambling scandal that included former NBA players and an NBA coach as well as the Sicilian mob also features an interesting character on the indictment. A man named Yevgeny Gershman, who, at these illegal poker games, hired women to serve drinks and provide massages while they scammed all the high rollers with the x-ray glasses and see-through tables. And when it came to people not paying what they owed for these poker games that they were obviously being cheated out of, Yevgeny would threaten to kidnap their children unless they paid. And he also faces a separate charge, along with a woman named Valentina, for conspiracy to commit marriage fraud in an attempt to get permanent legal status in the United States, as he had already lied to immigration. And authorities say our boy Yevgeny is part of the Russian Mafia in Israel. When I first saw the report, it said that he was in the Michael Tansky organization, and I was thinking, who the hell is that? What does that even mean? So I looked up Michael Tansky, only to find out that he was the leader of the Russian Mafia in Israel, which was started by Russian and Ukrainian Jews that immigrated to Israel around the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989-1990. And there are also Israeli Arab crime syndicates made up of Israeli and Arab families working together in drug and weapons trafficking, with some of them being occasionally involved in blood feuds. And yes, the Israeli mob is in New York. Yes, they're in LA. And also, the term Israeli Mafia is just a term, an umbrella term for multiple organized crime groups from Israel, or at least originated from Israeli immigrants. And they operate all over the world. Now, yes, I know, the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, yes, very controversial organizations, very controversial military, even more so than the US and the CIA. But this video is specifically about the Mafia. Now, if any of those have a connection, then, I don't know, maybe you guys can connect the dots if they do indeed exist. When Sammy the Bull was making $500,000 a week, his plug on all the MDMA he was trafficking was an Israeli mobster in New York. And this is actually where a lot of the ecstasy came from in the early 2000s, as one of the largest operations importing them from Paris and Germany was also run by an Israeli mobster. And jokes aside, yes, the US is a vassal state of Israel, I know, but I learned that in the past 15 years, the US did actually get worried about these criminal organizations being involved in government. Like when Inbal Gabrieli was elected to the Knesset, which is essentially like the Congress or Parliament of Israel. It worried the US because she was part of a crime family, and since Israel gives you legal immunity as an elected official, she used this immunity to prevent her father's house from being raided, and also her cousin had just been murdered as part of a gang war between her family and another group from Tel Aviv, the Abigail crime family, which was run by a man who said he started shooting people when he was 14. And also, like South Korea, which I covered in my last video, Israel has mandatory military service, meaning that if a guy in Israel decides to get a job where he has to use a gun, it's probably going to be pretty dangerous for whoever he's looking for. In Israel, 2 crime families in the area of Nazareth engaged in a war that killed 27 people in 2 years. And when you hear about Israeli crime syndicates, much like the Italian Mafia, all you hear about is illegal gambling schemes. But sometimes even that can be a bit more serious. Asaf Wanin is an Israeli crime boss that, despite being deported in 2011, was also present at the illegal poker games in the Hollywood Hills with Gilbert Arenas and the Sicilian mob in 2023. And instead of just relying on people paying back their debt on time, he put together a team of Crips and members of the Mexican Mafia in LA to make sure all these celebrities and rich people didn't even consider not paying what they owed. And one day, an Israeli man who may or may not have been connected to another crime syndicate was leaving a poker game in LA when he was ambushed and killed. And this was apparently something Asaf would mention when threatening people over debt. And then houses started being set on fire in Southern California. And yeah, it starts to get out of hand because in case you didn't notice, illegal gambling is very, very popular in Los Angeles. Really, the entire LA County and Orange County. But all of this is just a criminal complaint against Asaf since he hasn't actually been caught and he's on the run, believed to be in Mexico. But the LAPD have also tied these gambling houses to the disappearance of a woman named Heidi Plank, as Heidi was last seen at a high-rise in downtown LA that was hosting another one of these gambling houses in a unit, with her car being found a week later. But this was in 2021. As of 2025, she still hasn't been found. But of course, gambling isn't the only thing. Pretty much every organized crime group in the world has some hand in the drug trade, and Israeli mob figures have been tied to a large part of the MDMA industry in the 2000s. And not just in the US, but all around the planet, like this trio of elderly men called drug trafficking in Australia. And they were said to be active from about 2013 to 2021. And in January 2023, police in Israel noticed that a group of women appears to be living a lavish lifestyle, as well as taking very suspicious trips. So when this group of women landed at an airport in Israel from their latest trip to Germany, the suspicions of the police were confirmed when they found 33 pounds of cocaine and ketamine. And the police noticed that the same group of girls must have done the exact same thing twice from Hungary and at least once from Germany and Thailand. And they were actually being paid about $10,000 each to import these packages into the country, although the group paying them wasn't named. But speaking of trafficking, we have to move on to something a little bit more disturbing. So from 2015, Colombia saw a steady rise of Israeli tourists. Colombia is beautiful, so tourism brings in about 5 million people a year. And a group of men from the US and Israel saw a business opportunity in the small town of Taganga. And led by a man named Asimush, also known as the Devil of Taganga, they built a resort and hotel called Hotel Benjamin, with security being coordinated by a local former member of a Colombian death squad. And for $800, which is a tourist package, you would get food, unlimited alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and prostitution. And surprisingly, all of that is partially legal in Colombia. And of course, like most similar cases in Colombia, this operation did involve minors, and the fact that Mush basically only served and employed other Israelis in the middle of Colombia, it didn't exactly help them blend in. And he escaped to Portugal, but since he had an international arrest warrant, they caught him. But like any big money operation, someone just took over business for him in Colombia while he was gone. And different mafias like this just keep getting caught in similar operations in South America, with women also being involved in running these organizations. But now, here's something that I know some of you guys were looking for. The part where the mafia and the government overlap. As they do in most countries. I mean, just look at Russia. The mafia-affiliated oligarchs are forced to come together under the rule of the Godfather, Vladimir. And in the US, many, and I mean many, mafia affiliates have been active in city and state government since at least the 1950s. But here are two headlines just 2 years apart. The Abu Latif family in northern Israel won several government contracts to build things like an Air Force training camp for the IDF. And then in 2025, 38 members of the same family were arrested for terrorizing the northern part of the country. And you may ask, how does a crime family win government contracts? Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, you just blackmail and extort people. And like the mafia in most countries, despite being indicted, it seems like over half of the people arrested are not actually going to be charged, as only 12 actually have charges sticking against them. But these guys have extorted millions of dollars, evaded taxes, and blackmailed politicians. So the fact that so many of them are getting away with it leads me to believe they must be really good at blackmail. And even worse, there have been accusations by multiple media outlets and even an organization called the New Humanitarian that allege Israel has been arming Palestinian gangs to steal aid and food coming through Gaza, possibly to further destabilize the region, with one gang being led by this man who supposedly escaped prison with Israeli assistance. But of course, when it comes to that part of the region, that will require its own video, as it's much deeper than the mafia or any corruption. And I know what happens to people when they kind of get too controversial when speaking about Israel. But all I did was simply state facts that come from police reports and actual news outlets in Israel to paint a picture of organized crime in the country that most of the world probably had no idea existed. I try to hit all the countries that I believe people are less informed about when it comes to organized crime, just to shed a little bit of light on it. But thank you guys for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.